welcome back to episode 2 of It's Still Good on Tuesday, and we're glad that you're listening here on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever day you're listening. We welcome you back. We're excited that you've joined us once again, or some of you are for the first time finding us, so we're glad that you're along today. This is going to be a good conversation I think we're going to be able to have, and we're going to enjoy unpacking some things this afternoon. We've got our two. This is our youth ministry team.
Yep.
Sitting with me in this series, and really glad to have Jason and Dan along with us. Nobody needs introduction, I guess, to Jason Stanland and Dan Elkins, but they probably want to know, what is your favorite beverage? What is are you a cold or a hot beverage? What is your favorite beverage?
Why'd you choose the word beverage?
I just said beverage. Drink. Okay, drink sounded a little bit more edgy. So
that might be
let's go
verse,
beverage.
Verse 7 later.
Yeah. No, I'm trying. I'm setting you up. No, I'm setting you up for that.
Coffee, 100%.
100% coffee.
Yeah,
okay. What kind of coffee? What's your favorite?
So I'm kind of a coffee snob. I like doing all sorts of things, but I've learned that I like certain coffees made certain ways.
Okay, wow.
So I'll do single origin pour overs and stuff like that. So I had
best cup of coffee you ever had.
Ooh, man. Okay, so there's this local company in Jacksonville called Young Buck Coffee.
Okay, you're a Young Buck guy.
They have an espresso blend.
Man, we need to see if we can get them to sponsors. Maybe they'll sponsor us.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, right. Yeah, their family goes to church.
Because we need sponsors.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, we need a sponsor. Okay, all right. Good deal. Dan, how about you? What's your favorite beverage?
I will drink a cup of coffee here or there, but
I've never seen it.
My drink of choice is Coca-Cola.
That's right. Really?
That would probably
straight up Coca-Cola?
Yeah, I really enjoy a Code Red Mountain Dew as well.
Wow.
But probably Coca-Cola.
No, I can affirm that because I'll have had my coffee in the morning. We're on a conference or something like that, and off we go to the conference, driving down the road. He's like, all right, we got to find a Circle K or 7-Eleven or something. We got to find it. And he comes out with
what were you drinking when you walked in here?
Coke.
What were you drinking?
It was a Mountain Dew.
Mountain Dew? Yeah. Okay. Well, so you were compromising.
Yeah, he's a good bastard.
Yeah. I'll drink whatever's available. But.
Man, you guys reach for the quick energy.
Yeah.
Well, I think everybody knows I'm a coffee. I'm a coffee guy. I like a nice medium roast, just full bodied cup of coffee. I just like black coffee, nothing in it, just fancy, nothing but a nice blend of coffee.
When did you have your first cup of coffee?
Wow, you know what? My parents drank coffee all the time, and I started drinking coffee when I was like 3, I think.
Yeah.
I was like it was like half milk and half coffee, and then I guess as I got older, I just kind of weaned off the milk, and it was just coffee. So, but they always had a pot of coffee on it. It was just constant in my house growing up. So it was, just kind of early on, I guess. But anyway, and they used to sell Coca-Cola in drugstores.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Only in drugstores. You could only get it as a drug. Yeah, only in drugstores. Yeah, right. And they sell gasoline in drugstores too.
Yeah.
So you could get gas and Coca-Cola in the same place. And, one stop shopping. So anyway,
that reminds me. There was this pharmacy out in the Panhandle where I went to college. And it had the gun store on the left and the pharmacy on the right.
There you go.
And literally, I was like, "Wait a second, this is uncomfortable."
Guns and bandages. There we go. Right. There we go. All right, well, guys, we're gonna dig back in where we kind of left off a little bit this morning. I'd talked a little bit in the message in Titus chapter 1 verses 5 through 9 about spiritual authority. Mm-hmm. We talked about spiritual authority, and then we talked about institutional authority. And the last thing we talked about was moral authority, and that moral authority is where we get into the details and really into the weeds of the small print of what does it look like, what are the characteristics, what are the qualifications of a pastor. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're going to kind of dive back into because, again, I opened that closet door and all the stuff fell out. And so we're going to put it all back in place today. That's what we're going to try to do in our time. And maybe we're going to try to do that. So I hope you guys are loaded up on your coffee and Coca-Cola, and we're ready to roll into it. But let me read one more time, just to remind us where we are. After Titus was commanded by Paul, appoint elders in every town. And then the qualifications start in verse 6. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, his children are believers, not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant, quick-tempered, a drunkard, violent, or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it. Now, if you're sitting with someone, you're going to go, okay, well, let's talk to this person about the possibility of their coming as a pastor. How do you get into this conversation? How do you just open that door and say, well, I really need to talk to you about Titus 1. And we need to walk through the list here. It's also in Timothy, 1 Timothy, and there's some, kind of some overlap of some of the same things, but there's also some different stuff for elders and different kind of leaders. But how do you roll into this? How do we, this is number one. It's not multiple choice. Okay, so it's not like, boy, try to hit 6 out of 9 of these. That'd be great. It's not like who has the most. The question becomes, well, somebody has most of those, but there's one or two kind of weak on. I don't. Again, this is an idealistic kind of thing. It's very. But here's what I want to say at the outset. What we have here on this list. Is a list of things that I believe it was Watchman Nee who used to say, this is normal Christianity. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's nothing, you don't have to be a superhero to pull these things off. This is not like you need some kind of superpower to make this. I mean, this is what an ordinary Christian should look like. And if we don't look like that, then we're sliding under whatever the metric is for ordinary. Okay, but this is ordinary Christianity. This is not like just for the leaders. These things should only be true just of leaders. So how do you respond to that? What do you?
So I've been thinking about that question this week, and to me, it's kind of like this is like our spiritual background check, if you will, for like a pastor. Okay. Like, so when I'm recruiting somebody for the student ministry, we have the background check, but that's like step number 1. If you don't pass the background check, then you're definitely not serving with minors. Right. But that doesn't mean just because you do pass the background check that you should serve in my ministry. You may not have bought into the vision of what we're trying to do. Yeah. You may not have the temperament for working with middle schoolers. And so, like, to me, this is like base 1. If you want to be a pastor, you at least need to be at this level. But I mean, then there's so many other concepts like, all right, maturity, experience, calling. I mean, this assumes that someone's called to be a pastor, and we probably ought to at least have a conversation with that individual. Like, tell me, how do you know that God wants you to do this? Because in my experience, if you're not called to the ministry, you're not going to make it. That really should be the thing that gets you there and the thing that keeps you there. So who
do you ask these? I mean, I can sit down here and say, okay, so Jason Stanland, let me take you through this list. My guess would be your answers. You may be a lot harder on yourself than you need to be, or you may be a little bit easier on yourself than you need to be. How do you find these things? Who do you talk to? How do you find these things?
I think you can talk to the individual. I think you can't just like pull out this list and say we're just going to go through 1 through 10. I think you just ask what seems like normal questions, like tell me how you met your wife. Tell me about your kids. What do they like to do? Tell me what it's like in the home. Like you're asking questions to try to get some answers from them that might. Tell me about your weaknesses. Where have you seen the most growth in the last 5 years? I think the answers to those types of questions can give you a little bit of a peer into, but you're really going to have to talk to people that will give you an honest.
Well, I mean, if you're going to go start with number 1, if you're going to say, are you above reproach? Well, and number 1, in your opinion, you're going to either think, yes, I am, because you're not aware of somebody who has a problem with something that you've done. Sure. Or if you are aware of it, you're going to try to shove that under the rug. Well, no, there's nothing like that in my life. again, these are hard things to get to, and this makes the job of searching for a pastor a little bit more difficult, because you're really having to take people's word for stuff that you don't even know.
Yeah.
If we don't know this candidate, or we don't know really their area that they're in, or
you
whatever.
mentioned in the sermon that this was not a job description.
Right.
There's no expectation that there is any pastor that's ever lived that has fulfilled these things 100%.
Sure.
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to find out what is the character of the person that you're interviewing, you're talking to, you're exploring, you're praying about. What is he like?
Yeah.
Most the vast majority of the time. What is his character like? How is he when you're not interviewing him or talking to him?
Right.
Well, and I mean that's also when it comes down to ordination of a pastor, or where you've been. Like, so my first church, they said, we would like to call you to be the student pastor if your home church will ordain you.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, some people have different feelings about that, but it was sort of like, if the people who really know you and know your family and know your background affirm that you should be a pastor, then we'll go with that. And so, and I know that doesn't carry on for every church, but it's this idea that the church kind of becomes a gate, if you will. The above reproach piece, like, what if the entire community and the church is like, no, I don't think that guy is above reproach.
Yeah.
Then you should not hire him. To
well,
be
I
pastor.
had, and I agree with that. I had my home church ordained me. The church that I was going to, said you need to be ordained, and they said we're willing to do it. And I said, I would rather my home church do it for a couple of reasons. One is I knew my pastor well enough, and he knew me, that I knew if he saw a problem, he would be the kind of guy that would say, yeah, you're not ready for that yet. And I mean, I went through the toughest ordination council that I'm yet to be a part of an ordination council that was tougher than the one that they were asking me questions that, I literally, deer in the headlight, I didn't know. I thought, I have no idea, So it was tough. And I'm sitting here with guys that had raised me in Sunday school and been with me through years of middle school and all the stuff that I'd done. They were sitting there looking at me, and they were going to be the guys that laid hands on me. And I've got, still got the ordination Bible and all their names in it. My dad's name's in there,
That's cool.
But when you have, when you have people that know you to say, we see these things to be true. I felt better about myself, honestly, because I thought, well, I'm not just sitting here with a bunch of people that barely know me or that are going to pass me through no matter what. And I knew they wouldn't. And I knew even my dad sitting in the room, if they said, he's not ready yet, I would have walked out of there and not been ordained. And, so anyway, I think that's good. It's how do you find the people, and it's not like you got to be Snoopy and FBI is here kind of thing. It's not like we're going to go, digging deep into people's lives. But some of these things that I'm going, how do you just straight up ask somebody, it's just kind of a tough thing, I think, in some ways. But again, we have these guardrails. This is what it's supposed to look like. This person is, it's not that anybody can be accused of anything. So it's not the above reproach doesn't mean there's never been an accusation, because people can say whatever they want to say, and that doesn't mean it's proven. It just means they've said it. So therefore, there's that possibility rolling. But I think that, if you just bring in somebody, and I've dealt with guys, and you guys have too in ministry, where you just go, this guy's reputation is terrible. And then somebody comes in and says, hey, we think you ought to be a deacon. Or, well, maybe not. Maybe that's not maybe that's not the best thing for right now. So you kind of have to push back a little bit on those kind of things. But so the above reproach, again, that's almost like, what's the public opinion? Is there some rolling, gossip train out here, or something going on? You're hearing things continually about this person that really would not be fitting of a leadership position. That may be part of that. And then we get into this whole husband of one wife thing. So, boy, we just roll into that really early. And this is one of the two that I think will be hot buttons for us to deal with.
Why do you feel that way?
Why do I feel that way? Well, let me talk about that. Well, there's three. There's three that will be. But anyway, so let's talk about it. Husband of one wife, again, as I mentioned, is a literal translation of the Greek, which is literally, if you really transliterate, just bring the Greek into full, just a literal translation, it means a one-woman kind of man. So what does that mean? This is a confusing phrase. I had a guy, I ordained a guy as a deacon one time, and we were going through the ordination process, and we just had a checklist, and one of the things on the checklist was, are you the husband of one wife? Now this guy he was a deep bent. He was just freshly, he was kind of just really out of a non-church background, kind of a lost person. Really a great, just a guy I really liked. He was a good guy, and he ended up being a great deacon. But he totally, he answered the question, yes. Well, I found out later he'd been divorced a couple of times, and I said, man, why did you tell us? He said, well, I only have one wife. Oh,
at once.
Okay.
Yeah. Only had one wife at
one time.
Yeah.
So again, there's just a lot of misunderstanding about the phrase, and most of the controversy that we have with it comes from things that is probably not saying. We have somehow moved the issue of, well, that means the person who's being ordained cannot, let's just walk into it, cannot be divorced, cannot have been previously married, that kind of thing. And I'm not making a case for that one way or the other here. I'm simply saying this phrase does not say that. It is not an implication. It is not inferring that the person can never have been divorced. Because what that's implying then is if you did not biblically, scripturally divorce a wife and then you married somebody else, that means you got two wives. That is not what the Bible teaches. That is absolutely not at all the case here. So what we're dealing with is, again, and here's the thing, this whole catalog of characteristics is character. It's not history. Why would, in all these things that talk about the character of the candidate, why would all of these things be listed, and then all of a sudden there's just one weird thing that says, oh, check his history out to see if he's been divorced? That's not what it's talking about. Now, again, don't hear me saying what I'm not saying. I'm not making a big case here. I've known guys, that have been in ministry that have been divorced, and they have great ministries. They have a great marriage. They had a great marriage. They went through. I had one guy that I knew was a friend of mine. He spent $50,000 to $60,000 in counseling trying to get his wife to stay with him, and the marriage still ended. So, everybody that goes through divorce it's not always the same kind of thing. Sure. I think, and I think it was Danny Aiken that tied together, he said, what we need to tie together here is the word, we need to tie that phrase to the word blameless. They need to be a blameless person. So the question is, was this person blameless?
Right.
Yeah. In the ending of the marriage, that kind of thing, So there's that possibility.
So I think the question that would come up to a lot of our listeners, especially given this kind of framework of looking, if you're looking for a pastor, is okay. We don't cut through it. Like, we don't want to know, could any pastor anywhere and be divorced? It's like, should we, if we're looking for a pastor, should that be a non-negotiable?
Right.
That they've never been divorced.
Right.
Yes or no? And I think what you're saying is, I think however the details of how it happened, what the situation is, would vary from person to person, and it would tell a lot about the character of the man to know that. Was he saved before or after?
Yeah, sure. And it could have been pre-salvation, that kind of thing. And that happens. But here's the thing. Here's all I'm saying. And again, if a church, and the church has to make this, I think there's some grace here. If the church makes that decision to say, well, yeah, we'd be okay with that, or we'd be okay. The church, technically, if this says you have to be a husband of one wife, I got disqualified 5 years ago when my wife died. True. Because on that day that she died, I'd ceased to have a wife. So I should have resigned. And she says, well, I'm done, because I'm not the husband of one wife. And there are churches not too far from here who will actually have deacons and other leaders resign if they're not married. If they leave their wife because of a divorce, or she leaves him, or his wife passes away, they step out of leadership because they don't qualify for the specific wording here. So all I'm arguing with this, the only thing I'm arguing, again, I'm not arguing for what's not in here. I'm arguing for what it does say, and it does say that this person needs to be a person who is committed to his marriage, committed to his wife, and therefore you're closing the door of the possibility of accusations of sexual infidelity or anything else. I think this also can very easily apply to move into somebody who's struggling with, somebody comes in and says, man, I've just had a lifelong problem with pornography. I'm going to say, let's take a step. Let's take a step back here and look really hard, because I'm telling you, in your mind, you're not a one-woman man if you're struggling with pornography. You have other women on the screen. And so there's a problem with that in my mind. So in a sense, I almost see that as a disqualification in terms of just the character piece of this, which is, are you committed to your wife? Are you committed to one man or to one wife?
Couldn't you tell a lot? I mean, couldn't you tell a lot about a candidate for any position, not just senior pastor, based on the relationship that a man has with his wife? I think it's difficult in a search process and an interview process to ask some of those. Yeah.
It is very, and of course that's why we're looking at
doesn't our wives know us more than anybody else?
At the same time, the guy is seeking the position. Like in some ways, it's like, yes, we may have approached him, but if he reciprocates and is seeking the position or seeking the role of a pastor, you've kind of opened yourself up to some scrutiny, and you have to be ready for that. Right. When it comes to the marriage piece, I see it more as. How is he leading in his home? Because how he's leading his home. Well, and that's why, I think it was Brian Chappell that gets into this. And he said, this is not the piece about marriage and about the children being, and the question about believers is really, there's a translation issue there, is that they have to be believers or they are faithful. They're not, in other words, are they faithful to their father and their family, or are they believers in the way? Are they following Jesus? So there's really some debate about what that means. The ESV just goes ahead and says they have to be believers. Yeah. But that's a judgment call. That's not necessarily absolutely at every time. But what Chappell says is that this has to do with the tenor of the home. This is about, how's the home life? If his home life is a train wreck, your church is going to be a train wreck. Yeah. That's what this means. And if he can't manage his wife and his children who watch him, and then I'm going to tell you, sometimes, I know pastors have problems with their kids. I get that. Sometimes pastors have problems. Their wife has a problem. Their wife was maybe not in ministry. They were not in ministry when they got married. My wife was, she struggled with me being in ministry because, she just, that was just not who she was when we got married. And, she got there. She was fine. She really loved it before it was over with. But it took her a while to transition into that role where she could go, okay, I can be all right with this. But that was not something she ever saw coming. And sometimes we do that. We blindside our family, our wives, and say, oh, by the way, I'm going into ministry, and here we go. We're going back to school, and we're going to sell everything, and, and you're going to be poor. And it's just like, what? Where did this come from? So some of that is, but if you have a wife and children who look at their father and their husband and go, I'm not going to follow him. They need to be your fans almost, and you're the best people. Boy, we love, Dad, we know things are tough there at the church sometimes, but we love you. We're proud of you. We're glad. And again, I was very blessed to have that. It's really hard for me to read myself into a situation where that's not the case, but sometimes it's not. And so the question becomes, at which point do you look at a guy's home life and say, yeah, man, that's just not good, And I think there's maybe a selfishness to the church when they should think about this guy. If he's not leading in his marriage well, he's not going to lead you as a husband in the church to lead in your marriage well. Right. If his kids are wild and crazy and he doesn't put any parameters on that, he's going to do the same thing and let your kids have those crazy parameters. And now it becomes controversial. Like, okay, if mom and dad say I can't do this, but the youth pastor or the pastor says I can do this, that puts him in conflict with the local body. And so I look at it, again, yes, there is the negatives, like, husband of one wife, never been divorced. So there's the negatives that we could run through the tallies and check. But it's more of like, man, where do you want a guy to lead you in your marriage? Where do you want a guy to lead you in your family?
The pastor ends up being, whether you want to be or not, and whether you're a good one or a bad one, you end up being a model for Peter. And they're going, okay, that's the kind of marriage we should have. That's the kind of parents we should be. Those kind of things are in play in people's minds, whether they ever say it out loud or not, or whether anybody talks to you before you come to the church and says, "Oh, by the way, that's part of what you're going to do, is be an example to these people." But it's an assumed, it's a given in Scripture. This is why Titus is told, find somebody whose family life is not a shambles, it's not a train wreck, and make sure that they're doing okay with their marriage.
Do you think that this is one of the reasons why this is so important? Is because there sometimes is an assumption that if this guy has been a pastor for 5 or 10 years and he's not in the newspaper, he hasn't had any major, then this stuff's probably okay. We'll focus on, is he a good preacher? Is he a good administrator? What kind of personality does he have? Right. When in essence, if you're looking for a new pastor, or if a church out there is looking for a new youth pastor, this stuff is probably just as if not more important, that you don't have somebody that a year down the road, 5 years down, falls on his face and brings shame to the church in the name of Christ.
And I don't think this is a pyramid of importance here, but I think it is important that, man, this thing shows up quick. The husband, you make sure the family, Titus, Paul's writing, Titus, make sure they're not a person with bad reputation. Make sure the family's okay. This is like a big deal at the very beginning of what Titus is told to do. So, that to me says some things. And we could get into a whole lot of stuff here. There's a real can of worms that get opened up in terms of how should children look? How do you guarantee? Well, I guarantee you, boy, if I come here as your pastor, my kids will never get out of line there. Come on, there's no parent in their right mind. There's no parent in their right mind that would ever say that. How in the world would you say that? You can't say that about any kid. You can't do that. You can't do that to them or to yourself. So at which point, now this is, so he's using extreme words. Are they guilty of are they just like living this profligate debauchery kind of lifestyle? Is it or insubordinate? They just completely ignore you, completely disrespect you, and any rebellion is disrespect. Any disobedience is disrespect of the parent. Yeah. But this is talking about a consistent. That's what I'm saying. You got a leader, and they got 4 or 5 kids, and they're all off the rails, and they're all doing it. You're going, man, I don't want you to lead my church. Well, I don't want you in any kind of leadership.
You said that this morning that means that there's a systemic issue.
Yes, and that's what I think is being pointed to here. If you've got just one that
went wayward,
you're going to have, and you're going to have that.
We can't control how our children sin as much as we would like to. But we can't.
And if you could just nail them shut in their bedrooms and leave them there until they grow up, then that would about guarantee that won't be a problem. But that's not going to happen, and you have to you're going to have different levels of kids that need different levels of attention. You're going to have some kids that just need a whole lot of attention from dad, and some kids that just don't want you to show up in their life at all, hardly. So you've got a sliding scale of that, and some have very low maintenance kind of kids. Some have very, very. You've got to spend a lot of time with them to keep them on the track. But anyway, let's go on because there's other stuff, and there's really, all of these are really good. And folks, really, if you want to write, if you're really struggling with something on this, give us a call. Why don't you email Dan at fruitcove.com, and he'll be glad to straighten it out for you. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. Here comes again. So this kind of bookends the family piece, above reproach. Personally, probably above reproach in terms of the family. Then it goes into more character pieces. He must not be arrogant, quick-tempered. Let me say this again, just as a counselor. A person who has a problem with anger is one of two things. Either, number one, they're depressed. Because men with depression, one of the number one symptoms of male depression is anger. It's just like, where's it come from? It's just like, he's just mad all the time. I hear that from women sometimes. He's just over nothing. He'll just, or pick a fight or just whatever. Well, that can sometimes be a symptom of depression. Get checked. Get medication, get something to help, because you can deal with that. Some people are, again, when this is tied together, I noticed this is tied together, arrogant and quick-tempered, tied together. And so there's an overlap between a person who is, an arrogant person is a person who does exactly what Jesus told us not to do, and that is don't lord it over people. Yeah. The arrogant person is, you better do what I say. The arrogant person is the pastor that terrorizes his staff. Yeah. Okay, it's just like they're afraid to, it's just like a CEO that just, will walk into a board meeting and lose his mind and lose his temper and fire 3 people just because he's had, the wrong breakfast. So you've got people that have that kind of quick, hair trigger kind of temperament. But it goes with an air, sometimes that arrogance is an effort to control, and when you don't get your way, when you try to control something, it doesn't go your way, you respond with that temper. So some of that is, and listen, and you see it, I see it, we read about it, unfortunately, after the fact, after the damage is done in ministry. You got a guy that said, I've heard of guys where their leadership board put them on leave because, man, you got to get your temper under control. Or you just really need to dial back on this arrogance. You can't, but a lot of times those are in the same conversation thread. You've got arrogance and temper, anger, out of control, anger, rage issues, those kind of things get tied together. So that's certainly, I think, a sign of a major problem. You got a guy, you hear, you're investigating, you're talking to somebody, and you hear 3 or 4 people go, he's a pretty good guy, but boy, he'll just lose his temper over nothing. Okay, big red flag.
Yeah.
Throw the flag right there. That is a big moment to go, we maybe don't want to talk to this person.
We've seen in this generation of some of the pastors of the largest churches in America in the last couple of decades, right? There have been a number that have disqualified themselves for this,
being a bully.
And people are starting to, I think they're starting to realize that's not normal. That's not normative behavior. That's not acceptable, certainly for a Christian leader to be that way. So you don't want to go in those directions.
I've wondered, is that something that has gotten worse over time? Is this kind of the temperament of the person to begin with? Well, if a church is looking for a pastor for the next 20 or 30 years, they obviously want to avoid a pastor who is,
of course,
arrogant or quick-tempered. Yeah. But maybe that doesn't come up in the interview. That doesn't come up even maybe in the first year or two. So what you're saying is sometimes this could be a sign of depression or sin in that pastor's life. But what would we be looking for to try to avoid? Because like the same thing you said before, no, you're not going to ask somebody, hey, are you quick-tempered? Are you arrogant? They're like, I am sometimes. Like no one's going to probably say that.
Yeah. So I'll yell at my TV at a game or something. And that's fine. But I'm just saying. Again, we're talking a lot of this, like you said, we use the word systemic, persistent, those kind of things. If we're seeing this repeatedly, the other thing about anger is always a response to a threat. Angry people are threatened people. They're people who are easily threatened, which means they're insecure. So you're insecure, you're easily threatened. So when somebody criticizes you, and believe me,
it happens.
You will be criticized in ministry, right? You're going to get criticized. People are going to say things that you're going to go, wow, where's that coming from? And if you are a person who's insecure in yourself, you're finding your identity in what you do rather than in Jesus, and you're walking in that way, and then somebody shoots at you some critical word or a comment, your response to that is going to be to blow up and respond in anger. That's what you do because you're protecting yourself. Yeah. Anger is a defense mechanism. It protects the insecure person from feeling threatened by what's going on. So there's that piece, and I don't want to dive into the deep end of that stuff, but that's something that needs to be contended with. And then let me just cover this just so I can get this off my mind. Not a drunkard, not violent. Okay, so here's number one. I grew up in a period, in a season of Baptist life when Baptists leaned really hard into the prohibition movement into what they call the Temperance League. Did you guys have Temperance League in your church?
No.
Boy, I know I'm older than you. Okay, so
I've read about it in the history books.
Yeah,
I remember reading it.
So the Temperance League was a movement. It's it wasn't necessarily it kind of ended up being a movement of really angry church women, but it was actually an effort to stamp out alcohol, because these women were seeing, were being abused by their husbands, they were being hurt, they were, seeing all this problem with alcohol. So they started going to churches and started pulling churches into it, and you would have Temperance League speakers. So it was like a parachurch thing, and they would come in, and man, some guy would come in and just bring down the fire and brimstone about alcohol, and just basically threaten everybody in there with hell if you drink NyQuil at night. So it's just, it doesn't matter. So there's that. That's what I grew up with. I also grew up in a family. I had my grandparents and some problems in their history with alcohol, really bad. Destroyed their family, tore up their lives, and did a lot of damage to people that I loved. I lost a grandfather to health issues because of alcohol-related issues. I have never, I have dealt with, I played clubs for 5 years. I started drinking when I was 16 years old. I went through a couple of years of really, really problems with that too. So I had to pull away from that. I am anti-alcohol. I'm anti having a drink of wine with the meal. I am anti, I'm just not for it. So, but I have history. I have issues. I have my issues with it, and I would be, if somebody came to me and said, well, I want to be the pastor, but I'm going to have a hard time, and I have a hard time. Listen, I have a hard time standing up, and I cannot take the Bible and stand up in the pulpit and say, "Thou shalt not drink." I can't do that. Now, honestly,
because it doesn't say.
Have I been tempted to rewrite the Bible and say it says that? No, but it's really a problem. It's a problem in our culture. It's really funny. We live in a culture where a few years ago in Kentucky there was a school bus full of kids. A bunch of kids got killed in a school bus. A drunk driver hit them driving the wrong way on the highway. Everybody and their brother sued the Ford Motor Company for putting out an unsafe bus. Nobody sued Anheuser-Busch for putting out an unsafe beverage. What's going on? And so in our culture, it's such an accepted thing. It's such, I'm sure there are people that are just, shrugging their shoulders at me now, just going, "Oh, it's crazy." You can't not drink. I get that, but I'm just going to. What my thought is, if you're in leadership and you guys understand, if you came to me, you sent me a Facebook post from last night, and you were out with people, and you guys were hanging out at a bar and drinking. You and I would be I would be canceling my plans to leave tomorrow. You and I would be having a long, hard conversation, and it would not end well. That's because, again, in leadership, we can't do that. Mm-hmm. We cannot let our guard down on that. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm going to, my sense is, I know that the times are changing. I know beliefs about this are changing. I'm not ready to throw somebody out of the church because they drink, and I'm not beating, I'm not doing that. I'm not beating that drum. I'm trying to say in leadership there is a different level of responsibility. I will say here, this elevates above, I think that we need to be above reproach here to the point that, no, we're not going to lead. Here's the problem. This is a Christian freedom issue. There are people in this church who struggle with this issue. I ask people sometimes, when you post something online that involves alcohol, do you not have alcoholic friends? Do you have no friends that are alcoholics that will look at that and struggle because, well, I guess if it's okay for them, maybe a drink is okay for me, and it's not okay for them. Mm-hmm. Do you have an alcoholic and do you love them? Then do we really have to show people? I got a whole different sermon going here. Mm-hmm. But I just want to say, in leadership, to me, it's just better to say, just don't. Just don't. Now, this says be drunk. Don't be a drunkard. Well, sure. I get that, and that leaves room for, can you drink socially? Well, some guys say it's okay, and there's some guys that are fine with that. Some denominational groups are good with that. Some are not. I get that, and I sound really legalistic here, but I hope I also sound passionate about this.
My issue is the heart underneath it for a pastor specifically.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I'm of a younger generation, and a lot of my peers who I went to seminary with would actually take up this fight, though. And they would argue for why it was okay.
Oh, sure.
And why it was acceptable. And I'm like, what's in your heart that you're arguing for this position that you should be able to drink? What's the benefit?
You watch. I'll get more email on that than anything.
Yeah, it's like why are we pushing? Yeah, he gets the emails.
Yeah,
remember,
Dan gets the email,
it's why are we pushing for that though?
Yeah,
Why are we pushing for a license as a pastor? It's like, listen, when you jumped into ministry, you gave a lot of your licenses up. You gave a lot of the freedoms that you could have as just a standard church member. Yeah. But because you became a pastor, you're under a higher scrutiny.
And again, why are we making an issue of it? And when obviously in Scripture it's a cultural thing. Yes, it is. In our culture, I can assure you of this, it's more of a problem than in most cultures around the world today. And part of that is, we superpower our drinks, we superpower our alcohol. I mean, this is not just like, when you read about wine in the Bible, it was wine, it was fermented drink, but it was not like we make wine today. I mean, you go to Gallo wines, I mean, you go to some of these things and you go, wow, I mean, it's superpowered stuff. So, you kind of go, okay, we have a different kind of problem. And we also see younger people in our culture with the problem than they see in other cultures. So, I get it, and I really don't want to. I mean, there's so many things that we could unpack with that. But I'm just saying, zeroing in on the leadership piece, I would say be very, very cautious about this issue because it is a major problem. And again, we've got guys in churches that are friends of mine in this area that do drink. They're pastors. They drink. They talk about it in the pulpit. They show pictures of it. I get that, and I'm not condemning anybody. I'm really not. And I know I sound like just a little legalistic old man. I get that, and I kind of am on that particular count. But I just really, again, it's hard to be on one side where I'm spending a whole lot of time counseling drinking problems in the counseling room. And then come out here and go, I'm okay. It's okay with it. I'm fine with it as your pastor. So I can't do both. I can't be consistent that way.
Well, and I think what you did with the arrogant and quick tempered, or a drunkard or violent.
Well, and again, here's what we go. We go from alcohol to domestic abuse. Very easy jump.
Very quick.
And it happens all the time. It's not an accident, and I'm sure it's not an accident that those two words are kind of slammed up against each other.
And just in general, this goes back to all my life I've heard, if you're trying to determine where you cross the line to becoming a sin, you should be as far away from the line.
Yeah. Instead, so let's see how close we can get to the edge. Just how far back.
Is this okay? Is this a sin?
Yeah.
Can I do this?
Can I get away with this?
And it's just like, as a pastor, especially if you're called to be above reproach, you should do everything in your power to be as far away from that, anything that might even resemble a stumbling block to somebody else.
Well, I just think I think we have a culture problem. I ask our leadership here, our deacons I'm just asking, don't drink, guys. I don't want you to be seen to. I don't want people to see you drinking because, again, you're leaders. That means people are following you and they're looking at you and you're influencing them. Therefore, you got to be careful with this. I ask our guys, I know it's legalistic. Throw the book at me, but I'm going to stand on this one and say I would prefer you not. And that's kind of where we stand here. But that's been where I've been as a leader. That's not necessarily where everybody's going to be. But let's talk about greedy for gain, okay? Greedy for gain. Now, everybody's going to, there's nothing wrong with going, at some point you're going to have a conversation with a pastor about this is how much we will pay you to come here and be the pastor. The fact that, I was on a search committee with a denominational organization one time, and we brought a guy in, and we stretched as hard as we could stretch to get to. I think we offered him about $90,000, which is a lot, because it was more than the last guy had made, and this guy, we were kind of trying to reach him. We really wanted him. And then we just said, hey, we can do 90. He said, I was thinking more like 180. This was over 10, 15 years ago-ish.
Wow.
And that's a lot of money 10 to 15 years ago. Not as much today, but it was a lot of money then, where you just go, really and truly, wow, you understand, we're prepared to pay you half that,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it, I'm not saying, well, if that's where your debts are and everything, you got to do what you got to do. But at the end of the day, how do you determine whether somebody's? The fact that they expect to be paid. Paul said, the labor is worthy of his hire. You show double honor. You take care of people that are preaching the labor in the word. I get that, but where do you draw the line? And go, yeah, that's just a little. That's number one. You don't want to pay somebody out of line with the community, and the church that they're in. You don't do that. That's just not smart to do that. So how do you determine whether or not somebody's greedy? What does that look like? Are they always grasping? And it's not just don't just go with, well, they have more, they have a lot of money. Some of the greediest people I have ever known, guys, are guys that had no money. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, I had a pastor friend, and bless his heart, he's a good guy, but he struggled for money, and the church that he was in was not paying much. But he was continually resentful of people who had, critical of people who had money, and and it just, there were things that he would do. I'm just going, really, But again, his greed it's not because he had a lot. It was because he didn't have it and he wanted it. Mm-hmm. So there's that side of it. So you have to make sure. It's not that there's not. It's not that you should not have an income in ministry. You surely should. But, the question is, if it looks like, man, all you want is money here, we don't want you, because that guy's going to have temptation on top of temptation to have to deal with.
There's a hard balancing act, because, you don't want the guy to just get loaded doing church work.
Sure.
I don't think that's right.
Sure.
But, and as youth pastors, most youth pastors don't last long in their position at churches. The tenure of a youth pastor is much shorter than other positions. And part of that, I would argue, not entirely, but part of that is because the church doesn't pay youth pastors in general, and so then they get married, then they have kids, and then the amount that they started at no longer pays bills and feed mouths. And so they're just kind of looking for somebody else to give them an opportunity. And there is a balance where you don't want the guy to get loaded, but you do want to be faithful to him and his family. So.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, especially for people listening to this, it has become an issue. Maybe it's always been an issue. You could speak to that. I just feel like in the last 5 or 10 years, how much the pastor makes has become an issue for people.
Yeah, preachers and sneakers, all that stuff.
Yeah, so, and I think part of it is comes down to this verse, really. Is the pastor doing this for money? Is this one of his motivations? Is this what's driving him to get paid a certain salary? Because ultimately, if there is a pastor at whatever church and that person is humble and generous and giving, then whatever amount that the church is paying him should not be an issue, because he's probably going to give most of that away, either give it back to the church or give it to someone else.
And let's go back to verse 7 where it says, for an overseer as God's steward. We are stewards, and the reality is, the ultimate judge of our stewardship is God, not people. Mm-hmm. Correct. Now, in our church, I don't set my salary range. I don't set your salary range. We have committees and people made up of the church body that do that. Our personnel and finance committees do that kind of work for us. So we have people that are kind of filtering that, so it keeps things where it seems fairer and a little bit more realistic. There are a lot of these churches that we're talking about here, are churches where the senior pastor makes the determination, this is how much I'm going to get, this is how much you get. And they started out, maybe he planted the church, and so he was bringing, I'll pay you this much if you'll come in. So it's not safe, and I think that's something I've never wanted to do. I'm not, I just never wanted to get that involved. I can't even sign checks in this church. I don't have check signing responsibility. I don't want anything to do with money. Don't bring me an offering envelope. I don't want to deal with I don't want to touch your money. I don't want anything. I stay as far away from it as possible. I look at the stewardship report, and that's about my extent, which you get to do the same. So I'm not, I don't have any special insight into our money, and I'm not, but I get where greed is something, because there are ways to abuse financial positions in churches. Let me hurry along. We're about out of time, I know. Hospitality is a huge piece of this. Some people have asked me questions about Cam. Cam Booth lived with you for like 3 years. What's up with that? Part of that, honestly, was it came to me at a time when the Lord was dealing with me about hospitality. I mean, it really was about this particular. I've read that. I'm going, man, that hospitality bothered me because I've always been very protective of my home and family. I want a bare. I'm going. I got church around here. I want to protect my wife, my kids. I want them to have their world here where it's not this porous line between what the outside world, the inside, that kind of thing. And I've always kind of done that, and I really started getting convicted about that. During Pam's illness, we had a lot of people in and out of the house and different stuff, and I just thought, man, that's probably something I really need to lean into and think about. So when Cam came, he said, I kind of need a place to live. He wanted me to help him find a place to live. I said, I got it upstairs. It's open. Just come and live here. I didn't think he was going to stay 3 years. I mean, that was not. We kind of negotiated that, Cam. I love you, man, but we kind of just negotiated that as we went along. But it worked out great, and it taught me. I mean, I learned about hospitality. Mm-hmm. I learned, okay, so this is not just invite somebody over to your house for a dinner. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just being polite. That's just the hospitality means, and we've got, again, as I've said this before, I think the next level of evangelism for the church in the 21st century is we got to figure out hospitality. We got to figure out how do we open our homes up to lost people and let them come in and be a part of that. How do we share our life with other believers? How do we model that? How do we demonstrate that? So anyway, that's a whole different piece of things. But hospitable, lover of good. I think that means it means good. It actually is translated. I think King James has good men, but it's just I think good thing, lover of good. In other words, you kind of lean more. You celebrate good things. You see good things happen, things that are in alignment with the Word of God. You're at a place where you're going. That's a good thing. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah. Does it have anything to do with optimism versus pessimism?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. It's a kind of a strange. It's really kind of a strange term to use. I'm just going. So, lover of good. We're voting for the good guy to win. I'm not sure what exactly we're talking about there, but it's
maybe it's seeing the good in people, and choosing as a pastor, be like, hey, I know this is where you're at, but this is where God's calling you, and how can I help you get there? The old phrase, ministry is great except for the people. Some pastors, they get so grumpy and curmudgeon-y about the people in the church, but it's like, these are the people that you've been called to shepherd, and you have to love them.
Yeah. Well, good could be moral, it could be, those kind of things. Let me finish the last 4 words. I don't have time to get into them, but, we're talking then about being a self-controlled person, which has to do with self-control, has to do with, the Spirit of God brings. That's one of the gifts of one of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. You are able to, pull yourself back from things that are wrong. Mm-hmm. I think that's what that means. Upright is upright. You're walking in a righteous way, in a righteous path. You're holy. You're disciplined. So all of those, we could probably bundle those together in some ways too. But anyway, and then the last verse is about just, the person needs to be a person in the Word that reads the Word. One of the things we read this survey last week about, the pastors that were not, didn't have a Christian worldview, didn't believe in creation, did not believe that there was any absolute right and wrong. And the thing that synced up with those statements was these pastors said, we don't read the Bible. We don't study the Word. We don't live it. We don't do that. So this is, while this sounds really obvious, we go, of course, he's a pastor. He should be, should believe the Bible. He should be able to give instruction. Yeah. But here are, hundreds of senior pastors of churches around America that are going, no, I don't. I don't necessarily believe everything in the Bible. I don't read the Bible. I don't, I couldn't, that person, you could not sit and make an argument for why you should believe the Bible. So while this sounds really like, well, yeah, duh, kind of thing, this is really an important issue, and you're going to need to make sure, is this person a person of the Word, and are they following the Word?
So I think two things that come up with that quickly, is this person a lover of the Word? What has been their relationship with learning and growing?
Yeah.
And when it comes to their life, how have they been discipled at whatever age they became a believer? But the other thing you're talking about, this next pastor of the church here, I mean, he's going to be faced with a lot of tough issues.
Well, I mean, this is really. I mean, I don't say this to be cutesy. I'm just feeling like, man, I'm not smart enough to be a pastor anymore. I can't figure. These issues are just coming at us so fast, and I'm going, man, I don't read that fast. I can't keep up with all the stuff that you have to read just to go. I just want to stay level. I just want to be able to go, yeah, I understand. I've had people ask me questions today about stuff. I'm going, I don't really know. I don't know what that. I'm not sure about that issue. So. It's just that how do you keep up with all these things? And, you guys are going to have a challenging world ahead of you, I think. But all right, well, we're done now. Thank you for listening today. We appreciate you being along with us on It's Still Good on Tuesday, and I hope it's still good for you on Tuesday today as you go through your week. And we're glad that you were with us for this conversation. And look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you.